And now, I would like to introduce you to our host, Dennis Balsley, Global Solution Leader for Leadership Development at Korn Ferry.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks for the great rules of the road. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to my colleagues, Madeline and Steve, who are joining me, and thank you all for taking time in what is a very chaotic time for many of us and disruptive time. So thanks for taking time to listen. We're going to do about 25 minutes on this topic of leading in a crisis. The COVID crisis has a specific set of features that make it particularly challenging for us and for leaders in general. That is, it's high in uncertainty and it's unpredictable. It's challenging us near the bottom of Maslow's needs hierarchy. It hits us at the safety level. And the number of rapid changes and the conflicting reporting that comes out about the crisis is disorienting for many people. And finally, there's no single expert solution that is the fix or the answer. It's still quite unclear as it emerges and progresses. So it's easy for us then to get caught up in this uncertainty. And we naturally seek to provide clarity and help people find a path through. And so we felt this is a good time for us to remind ourselves as leaders what we need to do, what we need to be as leaders, and what we need to do for our people. We're going to talk about some tips and reminders on how we show care, how we help people stay focused and effective during uncertainty and disruption and stressful times, especially when our ways of working and it turns out the work itself is changing before us. So we'll go through, as we get to each of these pieces, I'll introduce my colleagues to you. And we're going to go through these 10 items, these be and do items for leaders. And I'd like to start on the B side. We're going to talk about mindset. We're going to talk about style. And then up first will be Madeline Dessing. Madeline is the managing director for Netherlands for Korn Ferry. She has deep global experience, particularly in Asia. She works in leadership development. She works in executive coaching. She does top team effectiveness. She's a highly qualified expert on this topic. And so Madeline, if I'd like to turn it over to you to start talking about how leaders need to be in a crisis.
Thank you, Dennis. So you may want to go one slide further.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So in a crisis, leaders need to be calm, confident and positive. They need to show courage, and they have to be empathetic and resilient. These are characteristics that have been highly effective for leaders in past situations of crisis. I know they are evident, but they're also very difficult to apply. So let me start with the first one. Leaders need to be calm. We have all had that experience when we are in a flight or fight modus, when our brain doesn't react rationally anymore, and we simply are not able to make a decision. We also know that as leaders, in situations like this, we can't show this concern. We have to be calm. I really learned a lot of one of my clients, a director of a school. A couple of years ago, he experienced a major crisis. And that was when one of his pupils was shot by another student. I was really impressed by how calm he was. He told me, if I don't stay calm, I can't think about what to do, and I can't see what's happening in other people. And it was really absolutely amazing. Go on. Sorry, Dennis.
No, sorry. I think it's unimaginable for most of us to consider workforce violence and trying to maintain calm when it's this close to us. But I think you were just going to go there. What do you recommend here?
Yeah, so I think it's hugely difficult because these are kind of unprecedented times. But I would say in any leadership position, you will have some feedback around your own personality. And now it's the time to dust that off. All of us have our derailers, and that's also normal. But just being aware what they are, that really helps in controlling them.
Nice, thank you.
So leaders also need to be confident and positive. We're all leaders, but we are also led. And if we think about when we were calmed in a time of crisis, it's usually because our leaders were expressing confidence in a positive outcome. And they came across as being in control of the situation. You need to remind yourself that you got to this position for a reason. You're highly skilled, and no one understands your business and your business context better than you do. In an agile situation, your instinct is probably right, so you just need to trust it.
So here, leaders have the experience, they have been successful, so trust their instincts. And it's not easy when you're unsure, but this also leads us, I think, to this idea of being courageous.
Yes, absolutely. This crisis needs leaders to be willing to make courageous decisions, to act quickly, to come up with new, innovative solutions, and to do things that have never been done before. Apple closing down all its stores as an example of this, and sending employees to work from home. These were all very tough decisions, and all done by leaders. But they believed them to be the right thing to do, and they were willing to stand by that belief. And remember, you don't have to go alone. This is the time to pull together a diverse group of people around you, and they can really help you to make these kind of tough calls. One of the CEOs we have been working with, she realized this very quickly. And last week, she pulled together her top team for a virtual meeting to agree some new norms for their collaborative work and decision making. This resulted in faster consensus over the actions they needed to take and to communicate even as fast as the next day. So quite a good example of kind of go on with it. Leaders also need to be empathetic. It's hugely important that all stakeholders feel engaged, and showing empathy is absolutely critical to this. And this means understanding where people are on the grief curve and really responding to that. And it also means that you need to show your own vulnerability. People need to feel that your empathy is real. One leader I'm familiar with is very well known for his straight-talking communication style. He's very focused on business, but likes to use jokes and humor to lighten the mood. What doesn't come naturally to him is opening up and sharing things about his personal situation. Last week, he realized that his people needed something a bit different from him. He hosted a leadership team call during the weekend to really get his team aligned for the week ahead. But he began the call very different because he started sharing something more personal. In particular, he spoke about his daughter. She's in her 20s, who had a lung transplant in the past, living now alone at a friend's house to stay away from the risk of infection. Well, that's kind of really something which is impacting him and all of us. It was really hard for him, but showing the empathy and sharing something of himself really helped to create that sense of unity. The team really appreciated it.
Thanks. I love that. I love that example, Madeline. I think the final area is resilience, which is a bit related here. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. Being resilient means being able to reframe the situation in a positive way and bringing energy to the people around you. To do this, you need to manage your own energy reserves, your own mental and physical well-being. Understand what is draining your time, attention, and resources, and look after yourself. Go back to what has restored you in previous situations. Perhaps it's exercises. Perhaps it's re-engaging with your purpose. But you need to find an outlet, as this situation will be stressful for all of us, but leaders can't let show. This is the first crisis in a total remote situation. I've been talking with clients and internally about best practice in working from home. Things like planning for regular breaks, do some physical exercise. all required to manage your own and your employees' well-being. And with that, their resilience.
Thanks, Madeline. You know, your first example, you talked about calm, and we had a leader who is probably naturally calm. And then you talked about under courage, a leader who doesn't usually show up that way, but spend some time sharing of self. So much of this relates to traits, personality, or people's mindset. What if people are thinking, I'm not naturally good at that? Empathy may not be my first instinct. What would you suggest?
Yeah. So I mean, it is hard to change who you are. I would never say to all of you it's easy, but you can understand your trigger points, and you can prepare well. If you keep these 5 things we have been speaking about really top of your mind when you're communicating with people, that will make a huge difference. So let me just finish this section with one other example of one of my colleagues. And this was about the CEO of Statoil during the terrible terrorist attack on the Al Amenas gas plant in Algeria. Throughout the 3 days of the attack and afterwards, when the death toll became clear, the CEO was calm and measured. He didn't want to add unnecessary drama to an already inflamed situation. And he was very much aware that employees' loved ones looked to him for hope and strength. He was also very courageous in facing every question and comment from every interested party, never passing the buck to someone else, and critically recognizing that his courage was nothing compared to that being shown by the hostages. He was empathetic in his thoughts, words, and deeds, putting those hostages and their families at the center of the narrative, appropriately. And he was resilient. Despite being followed by many parties 24/7, he showed up 24/7. He showed up as focused, caring, and in command of the latest news. Well, enormously impressive. So Dennis, back to you.
Thank you. And thanks for bringing these concepts to life with great examples of leaders in a crisis. I think let's see what people are thinking out there. We're going to do a couple of polls. The first one is, I'd like you to think about a leader you know. And when you look at the areas, when we think about the way a leader should be, when we talk about these 5 areas, as Madeline just did, when you think of the leaders you know, which of these, if people increased a bit more, if they did a bit more, they were a little more effective, and these would make the most difference. And so thank you, Donna, for we're getting the poll up. The poll should be open, but if you had to think about what would be the one thing that if someone could improve a little bit, it would make the most difference from the leaders that you know. This would be, I think, a little bit of interesting crowdsourced data for us to go through. The idea of being calm, the idea of being confident and positive as we go through, courageous, empathetic, and of course, resilience. And I'm very appreciative, Madeline, that you brought up the idea of the personal resilience, or I think, Steve, something you had said earlier today was, if you are not personally resilient or you're not personally agile, it's tough to lead agile groups or to help others be more resilient. And so you do have to start from yourself. Well, Donna, I'm guessing about now we should have a quick snapshot that we should be able to show some of the results in the poll. Oh, nice. All right. So it looks like by far empathy came out. We, when we did a little practice, actually the same pattern revealed itself, which was empathy came out sort of 2 to 1 on some of our smaller polls that we did. But when we think of about almost 800 of you, 41% of you said, the one thing that would make the most difference is this idea of empathy, is that care and understanding. And you'll also have seen a note perhaps about the grief curve. Just understand where people are in this crisis and transition. Thanks very much. That is excellent. That is excellent. I'm going to move us, because our time is short, I want to move us and introduce you to Steve. So Steve Newell is the managing partner in the United Kingdom. He has extensive experience of working with top-level leaders in international organizations. He's an expert in talent and succession management, and particularly C-suite and CEO succession. So Steve, if you don't mind, let's talk through the do part of our story here. What is it that leaders should do?
Thank you, Dennis, and hi, everybody. So we've done the B's, let's do the do's. And the 5 things that we recommend leaders focus on doing in these times are expressing a vision, communicating authentically, acting, seeking clarity, and keeping it simple and purposeful. And let's dig into each of those in just a little bit more detail, shall we? So clearly we've got to express a vision to give everybody the same North Star, to guide and to motivate people, possibly most importantly, to guide ourselves. And I'm not talking here about corporate vision, though this may need to align to that. This is more about your own personal vision as a leader. And in a second, I'm going to talk about the importance of an action bias. But it's important before we leap to action, to take the chance to pause and to reflect on what the vision that drives that action is.
Can you give us an example, Steve?
Yeah, well, so I guess most of us might have been thinking about this over the last few days as things have escalated. I sat down and thought about this from my perspective as a UK leader, and I started writing some things down, and I came up with something that went along the lines of, it's keeping our people, our clients, and their families safe. It's acting with impeccable social responsibility, and it's focusing on ways to allow us to thrive in the new normal as soon as possible. So I wrote those down, and then I thought, that's incredibly long-winded, Steve, and it doesn't align to the keep it simple principle. So I'm actually thinking of changing it to keep people safe and keep the lights on. And I'm not recommending that as putting that up as a poster child for a personal vision. But I think what we are saying is, at this time, it's going to be really important for each of us to go through that process of pausing and reflecting and making sure that we define our own vision at the start of this crisis.
Fantastic. Steve, and I know you're going to talk about this as well. It's so important to balance the vision and hope message with understand the world as it is. Like, we're not going to candy coat this, but in there is a sort of a delicate balance as we go through this.
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. And I'm going to come on to that in just a second. Before I do, I'm going to go to the second do around communicate. And clearly we're saying here, do it a lot, do it authentically, because the only thing that's faster than the speed of light is the speed of rumor. And as leaders, we're going to have to tell that real informed story of what's happening as we truly understand it. And I think we all know that any vacuum that we leave is going to be filled by rumors from people who are understandably anxious and whose anxiety is going to be fueled by whatever gossip groups or social media or whatever other channels they prescribe to. So we need to remember also, I think, that at times of heightened anxiety like this, people are comforted most by people that they trust most. And the people that they trust most are most likely to be those that are closest to them. I'm talking about in a proximity sense. Mm-hmm. So investing early in that, defining a tight, truthful set of messages to be sent out and heralded by the chief executive is of course important. But I think equally important is going to be the need for those messages to be shared, to be understood, and then to be reinforced and supported by all leaders, all managers at every level, and in particular in those team or one-to-one small group settings where there's a degree of intimacy that enables them to be explored and understood. Because we have to be very clear that this isn't going to be a big bang comms plan or a one-off event. This is going to be living, and it's going to be very reactive. And the comms, the communication cadence that we need to have is going to have to match that degree of fluidity, the degree of volatility of the context, and the extent of the anxiety of people in the systems that we're leading.
I like it. And it's a nice tie back to the example Madeline had of a CEO who said to their team at the beginning of this, we're going to reframe our norms because it is going to be a lot more emergent, a lot faster paced, and it isn't going to be so structured as you just described. So I think also, Steve, experience teaches us that most communication in a crisis has to be two-way, that the speak-listen ratio has to be balanced. It can't be all broadcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, or to put it more bluntly, we need to make sure that the amount of ear time and the amount of mouth time are proportionate, and that also we put those appropriate feedback loops in place. Okay, so the third do is act, and it's going to be impossible for an Englishman talking on the topic of leadership in a crisis to not channel Winston Churchill at least once. So forgive me, folks, but one of the famous quotes attributed to him is, "I never worry about action, only inaction, only non-action." So in difficult times, leaders with a vision should always default to a bias for action. And we're starting to see a number of examples of companies starting to act in ways that might just be counterintuitive given the crisis situation that they're in. So Morrison's, which is a large UK supermarket chain, came out and said that it's going to accelerate payments to some of its smaller and medium-sized suppliers, just to help to ease their fears over cash flow. So what they've done is anticipate the biggest fears of some of their biggest and most important stakeholders. They've recognized that currently they're in a position to do something to address that. And then they've acted really decisively and quickly. And in doing so, not only are they acting, but of course they're demonstrating those positive and confident leadership Bs that Madeleine talked about at a corporate level. And we've also heard of manufacturers who've authorized as much overtime as they can in the short term to their people on the factory floor, so that they're able to get the existing orders fulfilled, to exceed customer expectations, and also to take away fears that in this context they're not going to have their orders fulfilled. But also, and I think equally as importantly, this is an opportunity for them to give those staff who are going to largely be hourly paid, this is an opportunity to give them a bit of a bow wave of income to provide a buffer and to help them to ride out the tougher times that they really think will be coming. And then if we move on to our fourth do, so leaders must engage in seeking clarity. And what we really mean by this is leaders facing the world as it is, not how we might want it to be, particularly around unpopular topics. And always with a thirst for finding substantiated fact.
Nice. And this is that balance that you spoke of earlier, was hope and optimism, but grounded in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that most of us know that many leaders have become leaders, at least to some extent, because they've got that strong, charismatic personality, and we know that that's a great asset in times of uncertainty. But it can also be a liability, because that strength of personality can sow the seeds of problems. If it means that people filter out difficult feedback, or what Jim Collins might have called the brutal facts, if those don't bubble up to you. As you said in do number one, we've got to express a vision to guide ourselves and to motivate people. But leadership in this kind of climate is equally about creating that climate where the truth is heard and those brutal facts are confronted. And in these times of uncertainty, getting that balance right between spreading hope and speaking truth, I think is going to be a really key test of leaders. And I was looking, when we were preparing for this, looking at something that the Time Woman of the Year, Greta Thunberg, had said recently at Davos. And she said, yes, we are failing, but there is still time to turn everything around. We can still fix this. She said, I want you to act as if the house was on fire, because it is. And for me, Dennis, that's a really nice illustration of a balance between communicating hope and speaking truth.
A young leader as well. Steve, wrap us up with Keep It Simple.
So finishing simply with Keep It Simple, what we're going to need to do is to constantly remind people what's important and keep them laser focused on that set of common goals. I saw something that Alan Yoke, the Unilever CEO, had put out recently. It was a very, very clear set of must and must not do's around COVID-19 instructions. It went to all employees. It was published on their website, and it's on the public website landing page. It's a really good example of communication that's clear and simple, and it leaves people in no doubt about what they must do. And I think as we move further into the unknown around this, then one of those key tasks we'll have as leaders is going to be to continuously ask ourselves what our priorities are, and to rid ourselves of those tasks that just don't help to move us towards them. That practicing of what we call ruthless prioritization for ourselves and our people is key. And remembering that the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing.
I love that. Hey, I'm going to move us to the poll here. And part of my job is the process time guy. So same question on the do side. When you think about leaders, what are these areas that leaders must do? What is the one thing that if the leaders would increase a little bit, would help their effectiveness immensely? Give us a quick vote here, and then we're going to bring this all together for a wrap. What is it that you see of the leaders they must do? What would be the one thing they could improve on their do list? Donna, let's take a look, see what we have. All right. Communicate. All right. Pete, stick to the classics here. We want to stay focused on communicating a lot authentically. In fact, almost 50%. Above everything else, we've got some nice crowdsourcing here that is communicate a lot authentically. It matters so much. And then I think, Steve, you said this, which is you can't overdo it. You think you've already said this 20 times, but you can't overdo it as we go through this. So I'm going to move us in these last couple of minutes to 2 points. One is there are things in the be and the do topics that each of us can be stronger at. And so please consider those for you as we consider them for ourselves and the leaders that you work with. And here's some quick tips on how to put these ideas into practice. One, use these tips as a coaching checklist for early in career leaders. I think on a separate call, Steve had mentioned that there are a lot of leaders who haven't necessarily, or young in career, who haven't been through the financial crisis or many of the big things that we've seen. Use this as an agenda item in a team meeting to set the tone, to slow down the roll and get into some of the important topics first. Use it to brainstorm which of these creates the most stability or continuity in your team or your organization. And then one of my personal favorites on the bottom left is use these as a personal speed bump to slow yourself down. Sometimes I have to put a couple of these items on an agenda to remind me to stop and check in, over communicate before I jump into the actions and the things that we want to do. Then one of the interesting things you may consider is pick exemplary leaders in your company who embody these attributes. These role models are so important, and have them tell their story. Little recorded pieces, webinars, but think of the people who show this, who are this. And then give feedback to leaders around these tones when people aren't doing it. And these could be at a variety of the spectrum, right? On the left, people who are paralyzed and who are trying to manage 100 things and just can't move forward, or the people who are bulldozing their agenda and just at all costs trying to get 1 or 2 things done. Use this as a nice little speed bump interruption or a little coaching point. And I know, checking our time, we're coming up to this last minute of time that we have. And so I just want to pause and say to everyone out there, look, there's a lot of noise and advice on this topic. There's a lot of swirl out there right now. So please pay attention to the mindset, what a leader must be in a crisis. What should we be thinking and how should we be approaching it? Please pay attention to what the leader must do to lead effectively. A few minutes to pause and reflect is a huge amount of value for that leader and the ripples that they create. So show care, help people stay focused, and we all have to help people move from being in fear to leading on purpose. I want to thank my colleagues for your valuable time today. Thank you for joining me in this really interesting session. I want to thank all of you who dialed in or listening or will listen on the recordings. We really appreciate you taking time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.